Yo, what's good everybody, it's College from collegebeats.com, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make a beat for Kendrick Lamar. Stay tuned. Okay guys, so the first thing I did was I opened up my sample library and I was looking for a dope sample to start with. So after a while of searching I found this dope bass sample and I was like, yo, that's cool, I can definitely start working with that. Okay, so then I imported a sample into Studio One, played around with it, chopped it up, and then I came up with these two 4-bar loops. Okay guys, so the next thing I did was adding some effect plugins to the bass, and the first one was a mix tool, which is basically just a gain station plugin. So after that I added the S1 Imager plugin to make the bass mono, and to add a little bit of warmth I decided to add this vintage saturation plugin, and then I basically just adjusted the input drive to about 13 decibels. So the next thing I added was this distortion plugin by Waves, and I used the Manny Maracana distorted bass preset and adjusted the distortion level to my liking. And since we've lost a little bit of bass, I've decided to bring it back with the R bass by Waves, and I basically used the preset called Pensado bass and adjusted the intensity and the gain to my liking. And to squash the sound of the bass and to bring out the distorted transients even more, I've added the L2 limiter, and what I did was basically pulling down the threshold and the out ceiling at the same time until I get about 1 dB of gain reduction. And once I got that, I decided to bring down the threshold until I get this distorted crunchy sound I wanted. And one plugin I'm adding on almost every bass in my production is this piece right here. It's the FabFilter Pro MB, and it's a multi-band compression plugin, but what I'm using it for is the sidechain function. So what I'm doing with this is basically ducking only the low end every time a kick plays, and this is very powerful if you don't want this crazy sidechaining ducking effect every time a kick hits. Okay, so then I opened up Omnisphere and I was looking for a cool E-piano sound. So after a while I found this one in the Keyscapes library, and this is the chord progression I came up with. So after that I quantized the chord progression, and that's what it sounds like with the bass all together. So now you can hear how the E-piano sounded without all the effects. So I decided to add an equalizer to cut out some of the low end and a lot of the high end. Then I boosted the resonance to give it a more vintage sound. The next thing I added was this vintage tape saturation plugin from iZotope. And to make the E-piano sound even more old older and more vintage, I've decided to add this distortion plugin. And on the send there was also a Lexicon Hall reverb. Okay, so then let's move on to the drums, and the first thing I added was this snare, and I must slowly activate all the effect plugins so that you can hear what I did. Here you can see a mix tool, which is basically just a gain staging tool. The next thing I added was this equalizer, cut some of the lows. And what you can see here is the transient shaper by Isotope, and what I did was basically brought down the sustain, added some of the attack to make the snare sound more snappy. And to add a little bit of space, I've added the reverb. Next drum I added was this 808 hi-hat, and what I did was I humanized it so that it hits a couple milliseconds later to give it a little bit more swing. I also added some effect plugins, and the first one was this mix tool. Then I added the equalizer to cut out a lot of the lows. And then a tuner so that I can tune it more precisely. And to give it a little bit more space, I've added a reverb. The next drum sound was this cool live sounding hi-hat, and what I did to it was I added a little bit of swing so that it gives me a little bit more of a humanized feel. After I got that, I decided to add some mixing plugins, and the first one was the mix tool. The second was the equalizer, and I cut out a lot of the lows and a little bit of the highs. Tuner plugin for tuning. The next plugin is personally one of my favorite. It's Pancake 2 by Cable Guys, and what it is, it's basically a pan modulation plugin. What you can do with it is basically draw in all the different automation curves manually. You can choose from the great presets, you can set the length of the effect, and yeah man, I use it on almost every beat and it's pretty cool. And by the way, it's free, so definitely go grab it. So after I got the mixing done for the hi-hats, I found this kick. And after a while I came up with this pattern. So I added this mix tool, equalizer to cut out the very low end, tuner for tuning. And what you can see on the sends is just the sidechain for the bass. So then I added this percussion, and I also delayed it a little bit, just a couple milliseconds, so that it doesn't hit right away when the snare hits. I added the mix tool, equalizer, and cut out a lot of the lows and a little bit of the highs, and tuner for tuning, and the last thing was a reverb. Then I found this cool clap, and what I did was I programmed it so that it supports the snare but doesn't hit right away when the snare hits, so that it doesn't clash. I added the mix tool, cut out some of the lows and added the reverb. Alright guys, so I opened up Kontakt 5 and I was looking for a dope vocal sample, so I pulled up Exhale, set the key of the song to A minor, and after a while browsing through the library I found this vocal sample. So this is what I came up with for the first 4 bars. And then for the second part I decided to transpose the sample by 1 octave. You know, just to add a little bit of variation to it. I added the equalizer to get rid of a lot of the lows, a lot of the highs, and boosted the resonance. Pancake 2 to add this cool left to right pan automation. Mix tool, and to add a little bit of character I decided to add distortion to it. So then I opened up Omnisphere and I found this sound. And this is the pattern I came up with. So for the mixing I added the equalizer, but I changed the mode to mid-side. So I cut out some of the sides and a lot of the mids to make room for all the other instruments and especially the bass. So what I did then was I added the Ozone 7 imager to make the sound more wide. And to make the sound even wider, I decided to add a doubler. So then I opened up Kontakt 5 and I was looking for a cool live sounding organ, and I found it in the vintage organ library, and this is the pattern I came up with. So after I came up with this pattern, I decided to add a couple of effect plugins. The first one was the mix tool. Second was the equalizer, so I brought down a little bit of the highs and cut out a lot of the lows. Then I used the Pancake 2 plugin again to pan the sound from left to right. And the last thing I added was a reverb. Okay guys, so then I found this 808 bass. And here it's what it sounds like with all the elements together. So first I'm gonna mute all the effect plugins so that you can hear what it sounded before. And now you can hear the 808 bass with all the effect plugins turned on. So what I did was I added the mix tool, tuner for tuning, equalizer, and I cut out some of the lows and a lot of the highs. The next plugin I added was the iZotope Ozone 7 Exciter, and what I did was I changed the mode to tube and then basically increased the amount until I get the sound that I wanted. So right about here. Okay, next up is the S1 imager by Waves, and what it did is basically made the 808 bass fully mono, and the last plugin I used was the one I used on my bass before. It's a multi-band compression plugin by FabFilter. So what it did was it basically ducked only the low end information whenever the kick hits. And yeah man, it's pretty much it for all the different parts during the verse. So what I'm gonna do is show you how I made the hook. So what I did was I opened up Omnisphere and was looking for a cool guitar sound. I found this and that's the pattern I came up with. Okay, so what I did for the mixing was I opened up Mixtool and equalizer to cut out some of the lows and a little bit of the highs. Tape saturation plugin to pull out a little bit of the mids. And one thing you can also hear during the hook is this reverse sound. So how I got this was by adding a heavy reverb onto the main snare. I bounced it out to audio, reversed it and put an equalizer on it to cut out a lot of the highs. Okay guys, so that's pretty much it. That's the tutorial on how to make a beat for Kendrick Lamar, and what I'm now going to do is play the finished beat so that you can hear the arrangement. And I wanted to ask you one question. What type of videos do you want me to do next? Leave it in the comment section down below, and if you want to stay updated on new beat making videos, beat tutorials, mixing tutorials and beats, definitely hit the subscribe button or the notification bell if you want to receive a notification whenever I upload new content. Okay guys, so now have fun with the beats, stay positive and peace.
College